All right. Okay. So we should be live. We should be live now. So what I'm going to do is just very quickly talk about the fact that we're here at the server-side Swift year-long conference, and tonight we're going to be talking about a blog solution that I wrote over the course of, most of it was over the course of a weekend as a response to a particular need. I'll come right out and say it. My wife was doing a paper on social media, and to do that she needed to use a blog and do a blog site. I have a visceral reaction against WordPress, and when she said, well, I'll just use WordPress, I was like, no, you can't do that. So that was when I decided to actually go ahead and do the perfect blog thing, which didn't actually exist up until then. So a little bit of background to me. I've been creating content management systems for quite a long time. So this is not my first rodeo, but this is also something that was actually a very quick and dirty solution. That then grew a few legs. Okay, so if I was to go and have a look at the blog that we created for her, I'm not going to look at it in there, I'm going to look at it in Chrome. There we go. No, seriously. So we're effectively seeing the mobile version of this, which is not ideal. But effectively, well, that's really painful. Oh gosh. No, you're intelligent. Who hired you?
I guess you should let everybody know that's your wife.
Yeah. She told me how to actually use my computer. So here we go. We have her blog, and she's got a few articles there. So it's a very typical blog layout. There's no magic here. However, what makes this unique is that, as I said before, it's built in perfect. Okay. So what I'd like to do now actually is unplug my laptop, and guys, I'm going to get in your way here. And Sean, can you help me move the table? Let's go over here. And we're going to do a little bit of a whiteboard session. Okay. So I'm just going to click the ideas and just make sure that. All right, fantastic. Sorry everyone for getting in your way. Okay. So. Has everyone actually seen? Oh, you know what? Yeah, everyone should be seeing that now. Fantastic. So, in my pocket I have. So you've got to imagine that's your request bar of the browser. So, okay, that's your web address. Now, when that is actually being piped to the server, that request to the server, what normally happens, guys? What normally happens? You have a router. Okay, so you've got a routing framework. Okay. Next thing is that you have, it's been processing that routing framework, and what would you ordinarily be doing with a match? Would hand it off to a controller. Okay. So in Perfect's wording, as it were, this is actually called a handler. Okay. So controller. Can you see if there's a slightly better marker? Controller/handler. So once we've got our controller handler, what do we normally need to do? Okay, this controller or handler is actually, is that better? Catch? Fantastic. What's normally actually happening is that this is actually going out to a database, and it gets the content, then gets the content from the database, assembles, and then comes back basically through the router and back to the browser. Okay, so every single part of this is handled within a nice little ecosystem. Okay. What are the things that we actually need to do to actually handle the assembly? At that point, we've got mustars. Okay, we've got DB drivers, and we've also got possibly ORM. So there's not actually a lot that we need to try and pull together, is what I'm trying to say. Now, what happens if you then want to have an authenticated user? So administration. Okay, so coming out this slide here, we've got author and admin. And then you've got all of your routes and handlers, controllers, etc. for that. Okay, so the reality is that there's not actually a lot that we need to do. So how long do you think that this really should take to actually try and do if you have all of the pieces together? How long will it take you?
1 day.
1 day. Fantastic. 2 days.
Tops.
A day. Fantastic. Okay, so the reality is that this stuff is actually not hard. The only reason why it was hard for me was because of the fact that some of these things didn't actually exist. So I had to do a lot of trial and error with actually learning how some of these things were done. But the other cool thing was that I have to be honest and actually say that there were some parts of the ORM that I refined during the course of the process. I also made some helper methods for moustache, and I also actually worked out a much better, it created the seed for a much better organisation process for my code, which was actually in itself almost worthwhile, the whole exercise. I also fixed some bugs in the authentication, and so the reality is that we should be encouraging each other to actually use our code that we write. It's not good enough just to write a library. We had a situation today where we'd written a library, but we hadn't documented it quite well enough for some of the people using it, and so even while we knew how to use it, they didn't necessarily know how to use it because we hadn't documented it properly. Okay, so these are all really good exercises that that we, even as a perfect team, need to actually be going through. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to pick apart each one of these main areas and show you how they actually relate to what we would ordinarily use in our everyday code with Perfect. Okay. Sean, can you help me to relocate? Fantastic. Okay, so are there any questions so far? No questions so far? Okay, none on YouTube. Is anyone watching the YouTube channel for questions? Fantastic. Okay. So, if those of you out there are not using the Perfect Assistant yet, I strongly recommend that you go and grab it. Excellent piece of software. We use it all the time internally. Okay, so this is this is all of the source for the entire blog. It consists of, in fact, nearly a third of the files are actually administration files. But you'll see that we have some dependencies, and some of these dependencies will have sub-dependencies. They take care of the authentication in the perfect turnstile Postgres. It also includes the HTTP server, so that handles the physical aspect of the routing. And those are the two major things that we need to actually look at. If you're asking about things like ORM, well, that's actually included in the perfect turnstile Postgres package. Okay, so by simply bringing these in, then we actually have the advantage of being able to include them as sub-dependencies. Okay. So if we start at the main.swift, you'll see that there's some very simple configuration being done. Now, obviously, it's being deployed on a Linux system, so I'm actually putting a very hard path there for the file route, so that we actually know whereabouts to actually get things from if we're needing to address things. Down here, I'm creating my HTTP server. I'm using the turnstile routing. Gives me direct access to some of these login and authentication things. And then I'm just simply making my, make route, make admin routes, setting my filters, setting my authentication exclusions, and then starting the server. Okay. So this is, I'd also like to point out that there is a new API for the perfect HTTP system. And what this actually does is actually make it a little bit more configuration file formatish to set up your perfect server. You don't have to go through quite the same number of individual steps like this. It's all done in one configuration JSON. Okay, so the routing. I have a file here called routes.swift. This does the majority of the routing. You'll see that there is a home page. Now this is using a different template, so therefore I'm piping it to a different handler. So remember before we were talking about there was routing and then there was controllers and handlers. Well, this is where we have our controllers and handlers that we're pointing routes to, and then next line down we've got a single route of /page ID that is pointing pretty much everything through to this make page route, make page handler. Now this is simply because of the fact that we want to be able to take everything that's coming in, regardless of whether or not it's right or not, and we then want to see whether or not it's right. So if we were to go and have a look at the handler, jump to definition, you'll see that that variable page ID is actually now being used as a URL variable. It's being handled in such a way that we have a default of an empty string, and then we're going to select to see whether or not that page ID exists down here. Okay. Now, if there are no components that are actually found that are being processed into that, then it's actually going to say down here that there is no page found. So this is how we actually process I made reference before about the fact that we want to be able to put everything in there regardless of whether or not it's found or not. But if it's not found, we need to display something appropriate. So as an example, if I was to go to Rachel's blog and type in hello world, then I'm actually going to get the page not found message. Okay, it's still providing me a page, but it is actually providing a page not found. Now, one of the things that that in reality we should still do is we should actually be to be correct for Google, we should be delivering a 404. Otherwise, for Google, it thinks that it's actually going to be a valid response. So actually, I've just found a bug, and I should be saying that set 404. I'll do that a bit later on, but the reality is that just simply by doing these sorts of code reviews and discussing and looking at your code can actually have a huge effect about whether or not your code stands up. Okay. The great thing about this is that it is open source, and that if you wish to pick through it and try and run it yourself, etc., 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 feel free to make suggestions, improvements, pull requests. Okay. One of the things that I am going to suggest, however, is that I have promised already that I'm going to do a better installer, and it's a little bit more difficult to actually get it running currently without that installer. So hopefully that will come very soon. Okay, any questions yet? I don't see any hands up. That's good. Okay. What we do is we're actually using Postgres as our backend. However, there is no real SQL that we're actually seeing here. So if I was to pop into Navicat, helps to actually have it on. Let's try it again. Okay. Perfect blog. Okay. There's a grand total of five tables in this. And the reason why there's only 5 is that we have a page table that has a configuration which has, that's actually using basically, binary JSON that we can then query using Postgres' NoSQL capabilities. We then have a single linked table for components, okay, and this has the content. So we can actually see that here the body is donkey, and there it should be a hero image here. Now this is just a test site. If I was to go and log on to this RDS and have a look at the pages, there's actually a lot more pages, but components, you'll see that the components actually make a lot more sense. So there is the assembled HTML of all of the pages and the page content. Okay, so nothing particularly magical, but what it does mean is that we can select where clause URL equals the first parameter, which we are parameterizing and passing in to the ORM with the page ID. So if I was to go and have a look at this one here, or actually this one here, the DIY website syndrome, you'll see that it's looking for DIY website syndrome up the top, and that is simply matching to the page, that is simply matching to DIY website syndrome. Okay, so does that make sense? It's a simple match protocol. We're not doing any complex SQL. The only complex SQL that actually is in this entire thing is in the tags. So in the concept of a blog, you can tag content. So you can tag content to have to be talking about SEO as an example. Well, the thing is that because we're trying to cut down on the complexity of the data structure in the normalization, you'll notice that we have all of these tags. So these here are being embedded in Postgres' NoSQL process, which means that at that stage we're looking for all of the tags of whatever tag was actually picked up, and in this case, say, what did I say? Say blog or websites. It will pick up this one, and this one. So if I scroll to the bottom, how to build a website, then you'll see that it's actually picked up this tag here. Okay, and it's only picked up those three. So there's various different ways we can use a router, is what I was trying to get at. And that router, to come back to here, routes, we have page ID or tag and then the tag variable, piped to two different handlers, and that is all that makes up the actual functional side of the blog system. Now the reality is that for me the challenge was then, once I built this, and I basically built this over the course of a weekend, what then took the extra time was creating all the administration system. Okay, so I see Adam laughing back there. It's actually, the administration systems for web systems are often, they take as much time as the actual thing you're building, if not more, right? So, okay, any questions for now? Sean, any questions coming up on the YouTube channel? Nothing? Fantastic. Okay, so the administration system. I used Turnstile to do my my authentication. So if you guys out there in YouTube land haven't looked into Turnstile, Turnstile is an excellent starting point for registration, login, all these sorts of things. And it's done by Edward Yang, who used to work for Stormpath. He's now out on his own. He's got his own consultancy company, which is fantastic. And what it does is it gives us a very, very easy on-ramp to create these authentication into either existing or new systems. Okay, so the reality is I basically bolted this on top of my existing blog infrastructure. Okay, so you log in, and for all intents and purposes, this is looking exactly the same, and yet on the side I see site admin, social analytics, pages, users, and S3 bucket. Okay, so if I go and have a look at my pages, you'll see that I've got every single page listed, and in actual fact it is also reorderable. Now the reason why it's reorderable is that if I have an article that I actually want to promote, normally you would put it in chronological order in a blog, but if for some reason you want it to actually be in a different order, then you can reorder it. Okay, so I can get straight to the page by just clicking on the page name itself. It also gives me the actual URL, so if I want to copy and paste that, I can. I can also turn pages on and off, which is actually really quite important for, if you're building a content management system of any description, you need to be able to turn content on and off as you need to, because if, for example, you suddenly realize you've got a whole bunch of typos on a page, you just want to bring it down quick. The only way of doing that is to actually have an active-inactive switch. And then of course the configuration. So the configuration is some things that you can't edit on the actual page itself. And if I was to go to this page, so if I go to SEO analogy, okay, because I'm now logged in, oh no, I can't do it on that one, because that one is, here we go, website is like building a house. Okay, so the whole point of being able to actually have a blog is to be able to edit it. Okay, so I've used a little package here called, I think, TinyMCE. If we go and have a look at the sources and reload, you'll see that it's actually using the CDN for TinyMCE. And the reason for that is that I want to be able to reduce the load on everything that is being done. I'm just using industry standard components, nothing special. So my whole editing is effectively outsourced. But if I come in and make a change, it gives me the in-page editing. And if I want to bold this, I can. So I just bolded it. And if I click out of it and reload that page, I can see that it's instantly actually changed. If I want to go and change that back, then I really should. Otherwise, my wife will kick me. Now, one of the things that this doesn't have that some of the other content management systems out there do have, and we've done this ourselves in the past, is versioning our content. Okay, so this is one thing that it doesn't have. So as soon as I actually blow this entire page away, it's gone forever. Okay, as soon as I accidentally, press Command A and delete, and then click outside, it's gone. So that's actually a limitation of what I've done, and that's something that I would actually like to put in future, to actually version the content. We version all of our files, we should be versioning our content as well. One of the other things that I've done is architecture. So really the only other thing that I want to talk about apart from architecture is actually the templating engine that I used. And so I'll talk about that now, and then we will move on to architecture. Okay. So Moustache is the logic-oriented platform that we use, and you'll notice that that if I click on page, so I'll just show you where that's actually being referenced from, and in my handlers, where it is, there it is. Okay, so I have a response.render helper method which takes the template page and gives it a context. Now this context is all the information that we want to feed the page. Okay, so this includes whether or not it is authenticated, what the title is, what the menu we want to feed to it is, the page name, the components, the articles, and the actual page data. Okay, and all of this is being fed to page.moustache, which is just here. It's not a lot. So what Moustache gives us the ability to do is to actually nest our content so that we can reuse various different things. This header is a prime example. This header is right there, and that's the actual HTML. And it means that up here, if there is a component, remember I talked about components just now, if there is a component called GTM code, which stands for Google Tag Manager code, then it will include this, and it will include the content of that component, which just happens to actually be simply the Google Tag Manager code itself. Okay. You'll see that we actually have title. So we've got logic, and we've got just simple string replace. Okay. And then really it's just HTML with a little bit of logic and some is it authenticated or not, because you really only want to show the link to the login if the user is actually not logged in. There's no point in showing a login link if the user is already logged in. Okay, so that's really all the that Moustache does. Is it just simply shows data with a little bit of logic in a nested way. So inside page, I'm looking for article, and that is just simply the HTML that is, it's a little messy, but goes towards displaying the body. We have the hero image, and we have the tags that I described before. And if discus is meant to be displayed, it will actually show the discus JavaScript, basically, that once again is linked through to the site URL and the link, and that's basically all it is, and the discus ID. So it's not particularly complex outside of what you're normally used to building in terms of normal HTML, right? So this is really just a representation process that gives you some freedom to customize and create. Now, if I was to go and take this blog and do my own blog as an example, then all really I would need to do, unless I wanted to try and change the physical structure, all I would need to do is change the CSS. Sorry, not that one. Change the CSS. Okay. So I've used a particular theme with some specific fonts and so forth, and it's, you know, if I was to actually just simply go and change the CSS, I can completely rebrand this entire website. And so that's actually really the major point behind doing a CMS that has a flexible structure. Okay, so pages. This is the structure that relates to the database. Okay, so this is here we go. Page is the table that actually relates to this type. So all I have here is a ID, name, URL, config, which is specified as being a string any type. Which so I was explaining to some students last night that the string any type in Swift, well, and particularly in Perfect, is actually a magical type. Because it actually helps us to translate things in and out of JSON objects really easily. So being able to specify things as basically a dictionary is really important. And then a state and display order. So if I have a look at my my data here, I've got ID, name, URL, config, state, and display order. And that plus the components class make up basically the guts of the CMS in terms of its data structure. Okay, so it's not complex. It's designed to actually be very simple. Okay. So in terms of deployment, if I want to make a change. And I'm not going to make this change now because, you know, the demo gods, you know, smile on me very, very poorly if I try and make a change to a live production website during the course of a demo. I've learned that the hard way. Never try and make changes just to prove that you can to something that's live. But if I was to make a change, okay, say for instance in the handlers. Remember I said before about the fact that I needed to set a 404. Okay, so the way I would set this 404 is I would set the response dot header. No, I've got a mental blank. Status equals Status is a, yep, okay. So status, I'm going to have a not found, okay. So now, if I was to deploy this, if I was to have that 404, if I was to have that page not found, it's going to be accompanied by, instead of a status of 200, it's going to be accompanied by a status of 404, okay. So say, for instance, I wanted to push this to the live site. I would come back to my perfect assistant, and I would click on deploy. I would then select my my personal AWS array, and I would click deploy. Now I'm not going to, as I said, but the way I've got this architected is this, and I'd really like to turn back to the whiteboard, but let's not, because I'd need to wipe all that stuff off. Okay, so the way I've got this architected is that I have I'm not going to log in either. I have a couple of very small nodes on my AWS account, and they're the equivalent of the Linode $5 instances, and they're really tiny. All they do is they serve applications, and they serve it on a particular port. So if I was to go and have a look at the config directory, okay, I have here a Postgres DB name, a host, a port, a Postgres password, and user. Now these are local to my own development environment. There is also there an HTTP port, so this is currently running on port 8181. But if I was to actually log on to onto my my AWS array, it's actually running on a different port, and that is because it's actually got a different configuration file that it is using. So that configuration file is for each one of these nodes is pointing the database to this RDS, which I showed before. So they both have access to this RDS relational database instance, and I have each node then having even less individualism, okay? So then if I was to say, well, what else would you store? You would store images. Well, that's coming back to this this S3 bucket, okay? So you'll notice that that the link that's showing up, if you can see it in the bottom left-hand corner, is actually going to an S3 bucket itself. So every single one of these images is actually not stored on the it's not stored on the actual node. It's actually being stored on an S3 bucket. So it means that Amazon is responsible for load balancing all of the storage. Amazon is responsible for the uptime and load balancing of the database, and that means the only thing that I'm responsible for is managing the load and the uptime of the nodes. And if it means that, say for instance, Rachel's blog or any one of the other little applications that are actually running on this, and there's probably about a dozen, which is why I didn't really want to change anything live, is that any one of those systems, if they suddenly go ballistic and there's a huge amount of traffic, then all I need to do is actually just add another however many to my scaling group, and it will actually create more clones of the master node, which means that it scales out horizontally rather than vertically. Okay, so horizontal versus vertical scaling. If you are scaling something vertically, you are making something physically bigger. You're growing it taller. That means that you're giving it more memory, you're giving it more hard drive space, you're giving it more processor power. That is a really dumb way of scaling a web system. Might be a great way of scaling certain types of databases or certain types of raw horsepower processing units, but a really dumb way of trying to scale a web system. The best way of doing it is to actually scale it horizontally, and that means adding more little tiny compute nodes, all behind a load balancer, which is where Amazon comes in again. So the architecture, once again, is that we have all these little nodes. In front of that, we have the Amazon Elastic Load Balancer. So it means that Amazon, once again, is responsible for that. So they're the ones that are responsible for making sure that stays up. The only thing that I'm responsible for making sure that stays up and grows and contracts due to load is my EC2 compute nodes, which means that, I'm sorry, I sleep much better at night. Therefore, on those nodes, there is nothing special. There is just the running application. And the special things are on the S3 bucket, which for the media, and the RDS on the database. And yeah, okay. Well, that's basically about it for what I wanted to try and say. Anyone got any questions? Adam?
Yeah, going back to templating with Mustache.
Yeah.
I noticed that you have basically a one-liner telling the page what template to load. How does Perfect know where to check
Okay.
for your Mustache template?
So, it's a good question. Now, in here, this is a helper method that I stole from Edward and modified slightly. It's a response.render that is just simply taking the template name. Okay, you'll see that I am hard coding in there views template name mustache. Now, what I could have done is I could have actually said pass it the name, which could have actually been all of that. Okay, so views template.mustache. And the reality is that for true flexibility, if I was to actually abstract this particular HTTP response extension out to something that was more widely used, then I would actually probably just make that have everything passed to it. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? I see Rocky over there.
Okay, so do you have any suggestions about to protect the API from malicious attacks such as SQL injection or JavaScript injection into the page?
Yep. Okay. So there's so what Rocky is talking about here is if I was to try and say that semicolon drop table users, okay, whatever, or select from users where blah, okay, and try and force it to bring it out, okay? So if I was to put that in there, then basically what's actually happened is that it says it's page not found, but the reason why I feel pretty safe in what I did there, even though I put the DDDDDD, etc. afterwards, because I'm risk averse, is that we are doing this. Okay, under pages, routes, handlers. Okay. What we've got here is the page select. Okay, so try page select, and then the columns, the where clause, etc., and URL equals, And that's where that value would have actually come in. So that would have included the semicolon drop table users, right? But because of the fact that it is the ORM is using parameterization, it means that everything gets properly escaped and scrubbed. It means that these things can't get by because it's actually the databases themselves, the database engines themselves, which are actually giving us this protection. So if you really want to see how all of this is actually built up, so select right at the bottom, I'm taking a couple of shortcuts here. I am going to exec rows, jump to definition. Okay, and for those that want to try and dig into this themselves, you'll see that it is server exec. So this is the Postgres driver itself, which is taking a statement with the parameters. Okay, so I'm not trying to obfuscate anything. I'm not trying to give a false sense of security. No, we're actually using the driver itself with parameterization to protect all this data, and that should be a standard approach that we all do. I really strongly suggest that we never try and pass non-parameterized values to databases. Kyle.
I saw you were using some Google Analytics there. Do you do any logging of your own page hits in the test and things, or do you shuffle it all off through Google Analytics?
Okay, I do both. So we have a Google Analytics component in there. So if I have a look at social analytics, I've actually got Google Analytics code and Tag Manager code here. Okay, so it's actually including the JavaScript because it sees those. However, what it's also doing is also logging. So under package.swift, there was this request logger. Now what this request logger is actually going to do is, if I run this, then we'll actually see it in action. Just going to make sure that, yeah, all good. Okay, so this is the console output at the bottom here. And if I really? It's because of the fact that the perfect template was private. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to a couple of clicks around. And we'll notice that down here, back in our console view, there was, it's logging all of the HTTP traffic and giving us 200s. First time it's seen, second time it's seen, we're getting a 200 for there, but 304 for the images and media, which is absolutely correct because it's seen it and says that it's not changed, so therefore I'm going to serve it up with a 304. Now what would be interesting is if I was to give it that, and have a look at the, there we go, so it's actually served up that as a 404. So that is the change that we made just before to properly give it a 404. So that's our normal HTTP logging. Does that make sense? Cool. There is another level of logging as well. but I don't think I ever turned on in this one. But that other level of logging is here with this perfect logger, and what I'm actually doing there is, in case of SQL errors, I'm actually pumping it out to another log, so that I can actually catch them later on. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
What kind of thing would you, just kind of high level, if you want to add like say a contact us form?
Okay. So if I was to create a contact us form, first thing I would do is create a moustache component, okay, and that would be very similar to this pages component, that's page component here. But instead of putting the stuff in here, I would actually put the HTML for the form, okay. Now, all of the routes that I showed you before were get routes, okay. What I would then do is I would actually say I would make it a post route and incoming for contact us. Now that means that if you're actually doing a get request for the contact us, which is what the normal process would be, then it's going to serve up the contact us. So this, say for instance, might be contact us. If I was to actually want to process it, I would say process contact us. Okay, and these two functions, one would just simply serve it up, and the other one would take all the post params and do something with them, store them in a database, email the site owner with the information, and then would usually do something with it. And that could actually be, once again, just serving up some static content from a moustache, or it could actually forward back to the contact us. But then if you're doing a forward, then you don't get the ability to say thank you. Does that make sense? So, I mean, you could, in theory, have in your HTML, you could actually have embedded all of your the HTML in the editable stuff. You could actually do something fancy like copy and paste in the raw HTML that contained all that form, and then the only thing that you needed to do was actually have a post for that contact us. So you could, in theory, do that, but you know, your mileage is definitely going to vary. Cool. Adam, one more. Yep.
I haven't seen much in the way of 301, 302s.
Hmm.
How difficult would it be to implement redirects with this block solution?
A piece of cake. So what we could do is we could load from a file a list of pages that it wanted to go from and destinations that it would go to. And then we could actually have a matcher that either went in here in the handlers, so that either if it was in the 404, so if it wasn't found, it would actually then at that point look at does it match anything? If it does, then this is where I need to redirect it to. Or it could actually do that right at the start after you've set the page ID. So you could actually in theory set it there. So that would be what I would suggest. I did actually write a module that does this, but it's not compatible with this process. That module is here it is. web redirects. So this is a config redirect rules, and it's just loading 302, 301, what to do with it. So that's also using wildcards as well. So that whole module is that's what it's supposed to do. And the way you do it is, once again, as I said, it's not actually meant to be particularly compatible with the HTTP server style that I used, but it's meant to be used for the HTTP 2.1 style that Kyle has just introduced. And all it does is it sits right in front of everything. So it's a filter. So a filter is like middleware that a lot of other languages have in their routing, but filters sit above where most systems have the middleware, because it gets executed before any of the routing takes place. So therefore, it's a lot more efficient. Okay. Cool. Now, if there are any questions that were picked up in the YouTube channel that we haven't seen so far, I will answer them on our Slack. So I strongly recommend that if you've got any questions about this, then please please join us on perfect.ly. If you enter in your email address here and then press get my invite, then the process is that you get an email that gives you access to our Slack channel. And our Slack channel is generally working with well, we're on pretty much about 16 hours a day or more. And when we are not on, then I generally find that there are some other amazingly knowledgeable and generous people as well. So please come and join the Slack channel and get involved. Ask questions. The only dumb question is one that was not asked. Okay? And if we're arseholes by answering a bit bluntly, then please tell us, okay? Because sometimes we can be a little busy, but that's okay. We've always got time for you. That's what I'm trying to say, okay? All right, thank you very much.